Hi, welcome to Silent Generation. I'm Joseph,
I'm Nathan.
and this week's episode is about urban wildlife. This is something we've been thinking about for a bit, and it's actually been in like Chicago public interest story kind of news recently.
And urban wildlife, I think, is a good urbanism topic because people think a lot about how we're in this age of the Anthropocene and humans are starting to have such an impact on the environment that we see their presence everywhere. But we don't also then think about the reverse, which is that cities are starting to be places and refuges for wildlife.
Yeah, I just think that it's so interesting in our own lifetimes to see how the language around environmentalism and conservation has changed. Because I was raised on movies like Fern Gully, which
Yeah.
have this very black and white view of what counts as nature and like man as evil. I think it's stuff that kind of traces back to the Industrial Revolution, essentially. But then in terms of pieces of media, it's like Bambi onward, where we cast ourselves as this villain and we start to just kind of cleave into what is nature and what is urban. And I think we're both really interested in the messiness in between.
Yeah, like we talked about how on the nuclear energy discourse episode, how Captain Planet is emblematic of the boomer way of thinking about nature, which is conservationism, that the human and natural worlds should remain separate and there are places that are pristine that need to be protected.
Yeah.
But now we can sort of like segue into how we're going to start out by talking about urban wildlife, which is by introducing frameworks to start thinking about how nature and wildlife are not like out of place in urban environments. And that's with the Anthropocene and then Fred Pearce's book, The New Wild. So have you had much familiarity with the Anthropocene?
Yeah, I think I had heard about it like in my geology classes because they were saying like we're in the Holocene era, but there's some talk happening at the corners about a new era, much more recent. So watch this space.
Yeah. You took actual geology courses?
They were pretty light. I remember all my friends in high school took a much more serious science course, and I was like, I can't crack that. So I just need to fill a credit, and I took geology honors, where everyone else was in AP physics or something, and I liked it. I liked rocks. I felt like I was actually kind of getting pushed into like the geosciences, because I was one of the few people who paid attention in that class. And the teacher was like, we can get you set up at UNR, Reno, like with a geoscience degree and all that stuff. And I was like, I don't think that's my vibe.
Yeah. I think my high school might have had a geology course, but my college definitely didn't. Because in art school, you could take 2 math or science classes, but they were not usually very serious. Although I did get to take a serious one, which was a class on the Anthropocene. And it was like a dual credit course. It was very intensive. I learned a lot about the topic. And so I can talk a lot about the Anthropocene. So it has origins that go back a bit further, but it became popular around 2000 after the atmospheric chemist Paul J. Crutzen blurted out at a conference that you should stop using the word Holocene because humans have had too much of an impact on the world and we're in a different geological epoch. And this immediately caused like shock in the scientific community and they started to think about it.
Yeah, I can't believe you just like coined that from the hip. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he passed away recently. I didn't know this.
Yeah, I remember reading a news article in The Guardian that said like Paul J. Crutzen died. And I was like, why does it sound so familiar? And it's because he coined this term. And after he did that, there started to be like an Anthropocene working group that tried to get this geological epoch to be formally recognized by the International Commission on Stratigraphy. And they had to do a lot of things in order to get that ball rolling. The first of which was just like identifying when it might have started. So when would you say that like the Anthropocene started as an epoch?
I mean, if the Holocene is what 11,000 years old and it encompasses like all of like civilization's writing and like the acceleration of agriculture, like if I had to choose a narrower subset, I'd say like, well, it has to be after the 1700s, 100%. It has to be at least somewhere in the 1800s as like far back, because that's like larger scale farming, like methane levels go up. But then you start to like kind of chase closer and closer because like, well, then that stuff pales in comparison to like real agricultural developments in the 1920s, you know? And then like, oh, well, now we're approaching the nuclear period. We might as well just sort that into it. And then like, we haven't even started talking about ozone. Like, so you can like find yourself like making it shorter and shorter and you jump from centuries into kind of decades.
Yeah, it's hard to pick like 1 year or 1 decade when you can say the Anthropocene started, but The farthest back people tend to go is the agricultural revolution. The industrial revolution is also pretty popular. And then the latest acceptable period is what's called the Great Acceleration, which is the mid-century. That's when things like fossil fuel consumption, electricity use, those things go up exponentially if you look at them on charts. And then another thing that the commission had to do in order to try to get this formally recognized is identify one place where in the geological record they can use it as a reference point for the start of the era. And they identified 12 sites, and the one that they ended up selecting was a lake called Lake Crawford, and that's in Ontario, Canada.
It seems such a regular place. Like, it's not especially remote, but it's also not like, haha, in the middle of a city. You wouldn't expect that. Like, it's just a little bit outside of Toronto, basically.
And they picked that lake because they dug up sediment cores, and they found evidence in the layers of things like Native American agriculture and the start of the nuclear age. And that one's really important because I would say of all of the pieces of evidence collected to say like our current impact on the earth is going to be visible in the geological layers in the future, the two best arguments I've heard are that the nuclear radiation from above ground nuclear testing, that's going to remain detectable for millennia. You're going to be able to tell that someone or something was setting off nuclear weapons in the past. And then the other one is actually chicken bones. So we consume 74 billion chickens per year. A lot of the bones get discarded all over the place. Some fraction of those are going to be apparent in the fossil record, and they're going to be extremely dominant. You're going to see them at a much higher proportion than any other animal species alive today.
Yeah. I don't know. If I think too much about chickens, my mind just kind of reels. Like, it's kind of crazy, these very dumb little animals that are like so important in the grand scheme of things. And also the fact that they're kind of this symbol of like a simple homespun agrarianism when they're like a Southeast Asian jungle fowl that has been like, you know, taken across the world by the forces of globalism. Like, you know, even as far back as the, like age of exploration. Like, it's just, I don't know, these dumb little birds are so key to the human experience. Another thing in this sediment core I was surprised by, when you look at the core, you can't see the, you know, nuclear, there's not like a nuclear test line in there. You kind of have to take their word for it. Like, yeah, the, you know, carbon-14 isotopes are like increased in this layer, but you can see like the dust bowl layer, basically. And I'm just fascinated by the dust bowl. I think it's like, whenever people are doomers nowadays, I try to put myself in the dust bowl kind of mindset. Yeah. Where like, that must have felt so wrong. Or it's just like, due to our agrarian practices, we are being like punished with fallow years. Like, it feels biblical, you know?
Yeah. Did you ever read the children's book Out of the Dust?
No.
That one was one of those that I think got the Caldecott Medal, the Children's Book Award.
Mm-hmm. Is it the illustrated one?
It's not illustrated.
Oh, Newbery then, I think, award, right?
Yeah. Anyway, it got like recognized as being a really good piece of historical fiction. But I was read part of that in elementary school because, you know, teachers used to read books in order to teach us how to read. But that one stuck with me too. I would think about it a lot. It was a really dire time in American culture.
Yeah. I kind of liked how they used that in Interstellar. They showed that we're in like a new Dust Bowl era. I guess they kind of do that in the very forgotten movie with Matt Damon where he wears a mech suit. Do you know this one?
It's not Pacific Rim, is it?
No, it's not that. Oh my God, this is going to kill me. Because I actually like this movie and the director doesn't even like it. Hold on. Elysium. Yeah. That's what it was. But that also shows like a sad and dusty future world. I don't know. That's so much more real to me than like a world that's a nuclear wasteland. Like, that just seems like incomprehensible. But I've been to Las Vegas. I know what a dust bowl looks like.
Yeah. But back to the Anthropocene, as I already sort of alluded to, I think this episode is an interesting exploration of what the Anthropocene means for urbanists, because typically the people who've been thinking about the Anthropocene have been scientists, and artists have also made work about how profound it is that we have such an undue impact on the earth that our actions are now visible in the geological record.
Yeah, but then as in 2024, they actually held the vote on whether or not the Anthropocene will be like recognized by the International Commission on Stratigraphy, and they rejected it, but they did it very nicely. They said that like it's still this tremendously like useful term for talking about our impact on the environment and, you know, humans and like the permanent effects we leave, but it's just too recent. It's just too short. Like this is a whole commission of people who think in the millions of years, and it's hard for them to pick like, oh, which year in the 50s should we pick? Like it's just not really their ball game, I don't think.
Yeah. The most recent geological epoch, the Holocene, it's already the shortest at only 11,000 years. Yeah. And they think about deep time. The thought of a period that's only maybe a couple of 100 years long being this visible or this identifiable is like absurd to them, which is why they rejected it. But the term still remains something that's acceptable to reference in scientific papers, and it's an idea that they still think is useful.
Mm-hmm. No, it's interesting. It really shows that kind of strain of thinking in scientific life that is, I feel like we want to like be unshackled from our humanness. We don't want to center ourselves in the story. You know, we want this objective look at the planet Earth and its history. But then as we become a larger and larger part of it, we can't ignore ourselves. Like we don't want to be center stage. We have to acknowledge our presence.
Yeah, and then the other piece that's informed my thinking on this is The New Wild by Fred Pearce. And this is something I read for that Anthropocene course. I read the whole book front to back. And the main thesis of it is just that invasive species are not actually as harmful as we think. But there's many other ideas layered into the book. And one chapter in particular stands out a lot to me. It's chapter 11, Rebooting Conservation in the Urban Badlands. And this I did upload. Did you get a chance to look through it at all?
Yeah, I read through this bit. I was confused at first because there's just like a linguistic difference here. Because in America, badlands are like an actual biome type. It's a mixed grass prairie, and it's actually like the word is a calque, meaning it's like a translation of a word. So like the Lakota phrase is makosika, meaning bad land, and so we just took that basically. But when they say badlands, they use it in this British sense, which is like formerly industrial areas.
Yeah. And he uses some other words too, like greenfield and brownfield, which are specific to the UK. But the first half of the chapter is talking about industrial badlands, like you mentioned. The second half is on how nature is moving to cities. But I feel like the thesis in the second half isn't fully fleshed out, in part because, again, he's circling back to his arguments about invasive species. And he provides some data, some examples of how nature's starting to integrate into the urban environment more. But I don't think it's fully sufficient. But the first half is still important because he, by first starting out by talking about how wildlife can thrive in places that are toxic to humans and are almost unthinkable, that you can find things like orchids in soils that are polluted, it makes it easier for people to then think that, you know, all of these other species are existing side by side with us.
It's interesting because there's like, you could look at the idea that wildlife thrives where humans aren't. You know, like we've designated these places of land as like, oh, this is too bad for humans, but it's good enough for animals. And so you see this in like Chernobyl nowadays, or in the exclusion zone, like humans don't go there, so nature thrives. And then in the demilitarized zone between South and North Korea, like wildlife also thrives there if it's light enough to not set off a mine. Then it thrives there, basically. But yeah, and so like I think someone would start to be like, oh, this is one of those environmental things, human bad. But no, he turns it around into more of a like human is a part of this system. Like the things we leave behind can become like places for not all animal life, but a certain type of animal life, of wildlife.
I mean, honestly, his argument is incredibly radical. You know, he's actually explicitly saying in that chapter that it's actually maybe a good thing if we don't clean up industrial sites, because then all of these interesting, both native and foreign species start to thrive there. No one wants to leave behind like toxic materials, but he's saying that like given enough time, nature is able to heal itself and it isn't as big of a problem as we would think it might be.
It's funny. It's like, it's in like urban planning, it's one of the few things that people usually can agree on, which is let's get rid of the abandoned steel mill. Yeah, the arguments are about what do we put there, you know, but everyone's in favor of removing it. And so this is like kind of a take saying like, no, let's at least look at it and see what we have here.
Yeah, because he talks about how the undeveloped lands that people want to save from development, they're oftentimes pesticide soaked and very sterile. You can't find a lot of species there. But then these former industrial sites, I mean, he lists like 100 examples almost of just how there are all these species where you can only find them in former industrial sites in the UK now. It's like they are somehow able to like thrive there in those conditions.
Yeah, it's so interesting that like the phrase greenfield, meaning a place that hasn't been developed for its like proposed use, is so wide because I think that people might picture like forests and like natural areas that haven't been touched being turned into that. But most often, like in the case of Chicago, it's farmland. Like the northwest side of Chicago was farmland until pretty recently. It developed a little slower. And so it's like, this is not pristine land. It's maybe pristine from housing, but it's not pristine from, like pesticides and like deep agricultural treatment.
Yeah. And as we're going to get into, there's urban environments too. It's not just these former industrial sites. In some ways, they'd have more wildlife than what you can find in the suburbs and what you can find in the farmlands. This book can really change your presumptions. Like, I mean, I went into it thinking that invasive species were bad like everyone else. And I don't think everything he's probably suggesting is right. But yeah, I recommend this to any listener who wants to challenge their beliefs because he makes a really good argument for why invasive species might be our salvation. That's the tagline of the book.
I mean, is he like defending zebra mussels out there? Because I have a personal vendetta against those. Those scrape up my feet when I go when I went swimming at my summer camp. Like,
no, he does say that invasive species can be bad in islands and then also for lakes, because if you think about it, lakes are kind of like aquatic islands. They're closed and don't have a lot of input or output. But yeah, the Great Lakes, he has a whole chapter where he starts out by talking about them and how detrimental invasive species has been. So he does like acknowledge when bad things do happen. But overall, he says that invasive species typically only explode to the degree that you see with zebra mussels in like Michigan if there's human impact.
If we've made the hole,
things.
For them to fill. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not pristine environment. The zebra mussel appears and like ruins it. It's like, no, we already overfished. We already did all this.
Yeah. Enough on him. We can now start to talk about animals that are conventionally thought of as city dwellers. We're going to be talking about pigeons, rats, and squirrels. So, Joseph, what's your take on pigeons?
Broadly, I would say pigeon agnostic, pro dove. They're relative. Very drawn to the dove and its symbology. It's a pretentious word. I should stop using that.
You like that as a symbol of peace? Yeah,
I like that. And they're just so beautiful and serene. I like the sound they make. But no, I do like pigeons as a kind of symbol of like, this is our city. Like, this is like, we have wildlife too. Look. And holding up just like the ugliest pigeon you've ever seen.
Yeah. I like them personally. Every time I see them, I kind of perk up a bit because I'm not thinking about pigeons. But then when I see one, they're just always seem so content. Even if they're like badly damaged and look sick, they still kind of look like they're cute and enjoying the world.
When I'm trying not to be on my phone, like on a train station, I just end up watching pigeons. And I have a few games I kind of play with myself or hopefully with someone else if they're there. But one is like see the most like fucked up pigeon you can see. Like how many toes are they missing? The like golden standard is a pigeon with no toes who is somehow standing. The next type is what is the most like platonic pigeon, like the most standard pigeon. Like if you had to draw one from your memory. And then the other one is what's the most interesting pigeon. So that's where you get one that's like white almost entirely or like super darkly pigmented or has like a mottled thing. But yeah, and by the time you've done those three, the train is usually there, I would say.
Yeah. You want to hear something my art teacher in high school once told my whole class? He said the weirdest thing he's ever seen was one time in public, he saw a pigeon walking around with a sheriff's badge.
I don't believe that. Well, no, someone was gluing hats on pigeons in Chicago, right?
I don't know about that.
I missed that story.
But yeah, I don't know if that's true or not. But okay, so where do feral pigeons come from? Because that's what... There's many types of pigeons, you know, from carrier pigeons to fancy pigeons. Yeah. But feral pigeons are the ones you see outside. So where do those come from? So they're descended from rock doves, which look eerily similar to what modern day feral pigeons look like.
Yeah, there's not like a big difference. Like they're not like one doesn't have a mohawk or something.
Yeah, they look almost the same. And the reason why they have done so well in cities is because tall buildings and high rises, they act as adequate substitutions for cliff faces, because rock doves will go up high on cliffs, lay their eggs there. They'll live in little crevices. And so Chicago is full of them. Most cities are full of little crevices that they can live in. So that's why they've done so well here.
Do you know why you never see baby pigeons?
Why is that?
Because they like stay in the nest until they're full grown adults. and then they leave. So you never see like a smaller pigeon out unless something has gone wrong.
I saw one once though, during my trip to Rio de Janeiro in 2018. I saw one above like a bridge. It was pretty high up, but it was the only time I've ever seen a juvenile one.
Yeah, no. I feel like pigeons are having a bit of a moment now. Have you seen the giant pigeon statue in Lincoln Yards?
I've not.
Have you seen this? I mean, I feel like you and I are both probably like Lincoln Yards skeptical. Like, it actually is a brownfield development site. I mean, it was like a shipping dock area, so not like
No, it was
intense.
a railway yard, and it's still a railway yard.
Oh, they built over it. They capped it.
Yep. Underneath the buildings, there's still an active railway yard.
But yeah, other than the suicide stairs over there, they have a giant fiberglass pigeon, and the artist said that it was like a kind of like to take something very small and inconsequential and like blow it up to this scale. I think it's a little bit hack in that way, but I am charmed by it.
Yeah, I'm looking at a picture right now. It looks very HD and realistic.
Yeah.
It looks all right.
It's just like, I don't know, viewed cynically, it's just another thing to take your photo in front of in New York.
Yeah.
As if the Dumbo Bridge isn't doing it for you.
But on pigeons having a moment, I mean, it's interesting that we're following up last week's episode, which is largely about whimsical animals, by talking about all of these charismatic urban dwelling animals now. Because pigeons, I feel like, are one of those like LOL so random ones that we talked about last week.
Yeah. I'm thinking about like, this was like a meme that went around, but it's an actual full game, but Hato Full Boyfriend. Do you know this?
What is that?
It's a Japanese dating sim game, but all the characters are pigeons, basically, except for you. Yeah, so you need to decide which pigeon you want to fall in love with, and then do all the text prompts and try and get the good ending.
Wow,
yeah.
I'm sure it's no, I can't say it, but I was gonna say I'm sure it's warping people's sexualities.
Exactly. But no, another like and then so rats, because pigeons are called rats with wings, which I think is broadly unkind.
Yeah. I actually had pet rats when I was a kid because I had an older sister who was into rats and she had pet rats. So then my family, we went to go watch Ratatouille, and then afterwards we went to a pet shop and we got
right
feeder
after,
rats.
like on the way.
Yeah,
home.
literally same day. We shouldn't have done that because feeder rats are typically inbred and not very healthy. We should have gotten rats that are purpose bred to be pets, but we didn't want to wait. And then our pet rats had all these weird health issues. Like one of them, their head started turning, and
this is like hamsters are usually known for having the most like egregious endings. I might have mentioned this on the pod, but my grandpa bred hamsters and sold them in the 70s when there was a hamster fad. And they got like loose in the walls of their house. And my grandma would just be like, another one of your rats showed up. And it'd be like a little skeleton of a hamster when she's sweeping.
Is that the one who sold bagels at Woodstock?
Yeah. He's always getting into little schemes and stuff, which I respect.
Very Edded and Eddie coded.
He kind of is, yeah. Honestly. So Chicago has a few years in a row won the rattiest city, which means we beat New York in something, which is always good to hear.
I mean, that's not the best, but my neighborhood is also one of those places where you can see a lot of rats. Like when I was thinking about urban wildlife this week, Avondale, like I see rats more than any other animal. I see them scurry like every other time I like walk home at night. And you wrote something about how you saw a cat kill a mouse in front of my house or something.
Yeah, I was carrying something to your place. I think it was like a potluck or something. So I was like both hands full. And then I saw this like cat, and it was this beautiful like white and black cat, and it was angling up to pounce, where like they shake their ass a little bit. And then it jumps into this bush, and I just hear like just the most like in your mind's eye what you would picture a mouse making like its death rattle, I guess. And I was like, wow, that's just amazing to see here.
Yeah, I think that might have been a working cat that I've seen posters for in my neighborhood. There are some signs where it says like, this cat is here to kill rats and rodents, and please let it do its job. Yeah. But I don't think I've ever seen it. But I worry about cats being outside now after this week with coyotes.
Yeah. I mean, the more typical concern is wild bird populations, is that cats are bad for that. Like, 'cause cats are such good predators, and that they are, in a sense, an invasive species. They're threatening native species. But I don't know. It's winter in Chicago. I feel like a lot of our birds go home.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with outdoor animals. Like, our cats were outdoor cats. Even my dog and a rabbit were outdoor to varying degrees. But none of them died like tragic deaths, like out of the blue because predators got to them. But yeah, I would worry about that cat in the alleys because I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but coyotes, their main source for food in cities is actually rodents. That's their preferred food, their favorite thing to eat. So they love eating rats, and they're in direct competition with that cat in the alley.
Oh man, taking his job, taking that cat's no work contract that cat.
Yeah. But for listeners who have an interest in rats and want to hear about how they interact with cities, my sister, during her rat era, she read this book called Rats: Observations on the History and Habitat of the City's Most Unwanted Inhabitants by Robert Sullivan. I read part of it in middle school, which was way too early for me to be tackling nonfiction like that. But it left an impression. It's not too well known, but it's a really interesting book on the topic.
It's funny to think about like earliest nonfiction you've read. I remember reading this book about the hollow earth when I was in like late middle school, early high school, and really liking it. It was just about all the different times that the idea of a hollow earth has popped up in human storytelling. And we yearn for the hollow earth.
Yeah. I was reading about gay history is probably my first like adult nonfiction. I've mentioned that before. Yeah. I was reading like several books on the topic.
That's so admirable. It's just like to like figure like, oh, I guess I'm this. I should probably read about the other guys who are this. That's so good.
Yeah. And then the last animal as part of the like, certified silly dweller grouping is squirrels. So squirrels do surprisingly well in cities despite there not being that much tree cover, because that's really like where they thrive. Like if you think about each of these animals, they're kind of like habitating like very distinct places. They have similar diets where they're eating what humans leave out, but they have very distinct like dwelling places.
Yeah, trees, tops of buildings, sewers, and basements. Yeah, I don't know. I don't see too many squirrels now that I live pretty downtown now, but my college campus was full of squirrels. Every college campus thinks that they have special, unique squirrels that are different from every other place. I did notice when I was at Ann Arbor, despite not being that far geographically, they had like much redder squirrels. And I don't know. I think that like the standard gray city squirrel, like I think it's kind of a spectrum. There's redder ones of them.
Yeah. My neighborhood that I grew up in, it actually is black squirrels.
Oh, wow.
So Ravenswood/Lincoln Square. I forgot about that until I visited my neighborhood as an adult, and I saw like black squirrels outside my childhood home, which felt like, I don't know why, but my family, we had all black animals, like our dog, most of our cats, even a rabbit. And then there were black squirrels in the neighborhood. So when I see like black animals, I get very nostalgic.
Yeah, that's cute. Goth animal family.
Yeah.
I wonder if that population was able to stay there because, I guess like Ravenswood, Lincoln Square is kind of hemmed in. There would have been more industrial stuff to the north back in the day. And then there would have been just more development and kind of city living to the east and uptown. And then to the south, maybe more industrial stuff too by the river. So nowadays it's less industrial broadly across there. So maybe the black squirrels are sneaking out a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I do like when they look black, but also the red squirrels are very iconic. And there's actually a big debate in the UK over red squirrels getting replaced by gray squirrels because they're an invasive species there.
It's funny because like, yeah, they are like, yes, they're different species, but the main difference is like you can identify it, like, and if like one is filling the role of the other one pretty well, like if you look at it from a mile high kind of view, it's like, oh, what does it matter what color the squirrel is if the nuts are still getting eaten, But yeah, I was reading about it. I think it gets weird. I think it's wrapped up in the UK's image of itself as an island, immune from invaders, and that idea of invaders shifts every so often. It's the French, and then it's like migrants and stuff. But yeah, like I was reading this stuff, they would have stuff that's like kill a gray, save a red.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the red ones are dying off because the gray ones carry a disease that isn't that won't kill them, but it will kill the red squirrels. Mm-hmm. It's not like the gray ones are intentionally pushing out the red ones. They're just a little bit better at surviving for some reason.
Interesting.
But Fred Pearce's book, he also talks about how the UK's ecology, their environment, it largely only like popped up, after the last glacial period. And it's all kind of, every species that's there today only kind of got there 10,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. So the idea that like all these species are particularly native to the British Isles is kind of inaccurate.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's so interesting to think about how long animals have actually been in their respective places. In America, we love our wild horses, but our wild horses are actually feral. They're all from Europe. But America, like the Americas, did have horses like more than 10,000 years ago or something like that. And so wild horses fit very well into that like existing ecological niche.
For me personally, when I see a domesticated animal in the wild, I can't ever shake that association. Like a wild horse to me still just looks like a horse.
Yeah, a horse and you just can't see the fence, basically.
Yeah. It never feels particularly wild to me.
No. That's back to hamsters, like seeing an actual like wildlife photo of a wild hamster in Iran. That's where they're from, apparently. Like them like at a little like creek side. It's just messed up. Like, no, they should be in a wheel. Like that's more natural in my mind's eye.
Yeah. Or like jungle fowl, which you mentioned earlier. Those are what just modern chickens are descended from, but you can find pictures of them online in jungles, like just literally in lush tropical rainforests, and it just seems so odd.
Yeah, it's not like the modern like super juiced up chicken, but it's like still identifiably a chicken.
Yeah, they look kind of similar,
and the roosters look very similar. Like the males, the cocks look very identical.
Yeah. And then the next section, we can talk about animals that are still viewed as being a little bit out of place in urban environments. But these are all animals you can find in Chicago that actually were here 100 years ago, went extinct, and then they all came back into the city by their own accord without reintroduction programs around the 90s, which is really interesting to think about.
Yeah, it's so cool. This is like in living memory, like in very recent memory, like an actual change that has like been slowly kind of happening. And it's like, oh yeah, I guess you are seeing more coyotes nowadays.
Yeah. And even animals that I think I would never think weren't here for a period of time, like Canadian geese, those seem as everyday to me as pigeons.
Yeah, just dodge them on the bike path and stuff. Yeah, it's like a Canadian geese. They're always here.
Yeah. But yeah, I learned from a Curious City episode on how does Chicago track its coyotes, that those along with white-tailed deer, coyotes, beavers, like many of the animals we're about to talk about, they started to pop up in Chicagoland around the 70s and 80s. And then they took a while to work their way into urban neighborhoods. And then in the present day, we've started to see them, pretty much all of them, literally downtown at different points.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So river otters. This is, I think, maybe one of the cutest ones on our list.
Yeah. So this one is actually the only I've not seen in Chicago ever, despite growing up with the Chicago River in my backyard. If I saw one, I would flip out. They're very cute.
Yeah, they're great. I just forget that we can get those. Like there was a new, like I guess one hasn't been seen in 15 years of monitoring until recently.
Yeah, that news article, their headline kind of tricked me. I'm sure they tricked a lot of people, because I read that and I thought they were saying that like river otters hadn't been spotted in Chicago before, but actually they were just saying that the Lincoln Park Zoo's specific cameras hadn't seen otters before. It wasn't as special as I thought. But before I started to read into river otters for this episode, I thought these were like the newest animal to work their way into Chicago.
The newest add to the
we're going to start seeing them everywhere, but that's not the case.
Yeah. This one did have some like light reintroduction. The state of Illinois was trading otters with other states, which I think is cute. I like to imagine it happens like in a discrete location. They open up the back of the car and it's full of otters.
Yeah. By 1989, there are only 100 otters left in the state. And then I think they got 300 or 400 from some state in the South, or some states in the South. And that's how they got like a bigger, like a healthier genetic pool for the otter population.
Yeah, 100 does not seem like a lot. I'd be worried for them.
I know, but it's wild, like learning about animals this week and how they became quote unquote invasive species or proliferated. Like the muskrat population in Europe started from only like 5 muskrats.
Oh God, they must have all kinds of issues. Like those are sickly European muskrats.
I know.
Habsburgian muskrats.
I mean, somehow they're okay, but there's no way inbreeding isn't a problem if there's they only start with a group of 5.
Yeah. But it's also like with animals, like who can tell? Like I just wonder if like previous muskrats would have been like, oh my God, something is wrong with that muskrat. But to us, we're like, so great to have these guys back.
Yeah, they're like, that muskrat isn't hot.
Yeah. Muskrats have gotten so much uglier.
Yeah. And then you wanted to talk about snapping turtles.
Yeah. This is kind of cringe, the name they gave for this one. Chonk the thick snapping turtle is a superstar. And great news for the Chicago River, says Block. What's that publication?
Block Club Chicago. They're a very good local news source.
Yeah. and they don't have paywalls, which is nice. Yeah, I just think the name is too much. It's just so internet.
Yeah.
I remember when everyone was naming snowplows funny things and all that. Like, that just it runs its course. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really like silly names. That's part of why with
Sorry.
No, it's true, but like that's part of why for the Silent Generation episodes I'd like to keep them short. I'm not trying to call like this episode like Urban Wildlife Explosion or something.
No, that's fair, yeah.
Yeah, but no, I don't like his name. I also don't like Chance the Snapper. I feel like that's part of why this trend started.
Yeah, to people who don't know, like we have this park in Chicago, Humboldt Park, on the west northwest side. Got this wonderful lagoon, and then back in 2019, right before COVID, as I remember it, there was a crocodile in there, and then so people hunted around for it. Parks Department couldn't catch it. We're just not familiar with crocodiles. We bring up a crocodile expert from the south, and he's able to catch it, and everyone names it Chance the Snapper. But you have an alternate backstory here.
Yeah, so this is a story I heard from someone who is a librarian at the Humboldt Park branch. They were told by a patron that she, along with her family, they were the ones that released the alligator in the Humboldt Park lagoon.
What?
Yeah. So apparently it had been in there for 2 years, and it was named Humbolito. And the person telling this librarian the story, they were actually like incredibly worried and nervous. Like it seemed like it was a legitimate story, but
they were afraid it was going to get back to them. Like, what's even the
they were
punishment
afraid they
for
were going
that?
to get in trouble. I mean, the city spent thousands fencing off the Humboldt Park lagoon while this was happening,
and hiring a crocodile trapper.
Yeah, it ended up costing them a lot of money.
Yeah.
I bet they could have gotten in trouble, but I don't. Yeah, I've told this story to other Chicagoans, and they really don't believe me.
I'm skeptical of. So when they found Chance the Snapper, he's estimated to be between 4 and 6 years old, and so I wonder if a 2-year-old crocodile, at the youngest estimation, would be able to survive 2 Chicago winters. I don't know. That seems a little, unless there's like some like warm water dispersal pond or something like that he could hang out in. That just, what would he eat in that time of the season? Like, I don't know.
Well, alligators can actually do this thing where
they hibernate, kind of.
They kind of hibernate. They put their snout above the water, and then the pond will freeze around them, and then they can dethaw. I've seen videos of it,
and he would have been smaller too, so hard to spot. Like, it's cold, no one's out there looking for him anyway. I think it is. I don't know. It could be true.
Yeah. But no, my credibility does not rest on this story from another person. But
hearsay.
I do like the name Humbolito more than Chance the Snapper.
Yeah, it's cute. Yeah. To the listener, like, Humboldt Park is a very Puerto Rican neighborhood. I was just kind of over there today, eating Puerto Rican food and buying ski gear.
What did you get?
I got carne frita, which is like chunks of fried pork.
You love pork so much.
Maybe I do.
Yeah. But back to snapping turtles, I would see them, growing up in the Chicago River in my backyard. They would go up on the dock, and what was his name? Chunk the Thick. He actually is a less scary looking snapping turtle. The ones that I would see would be the ones with the spikes. Where they have those like horrifying looking throats. Like they really scare me.
Yeah, no, they're like scary. One time I was driving with my uncle. We were going like northwest out of the city, and there was a snapping turtle like in the middle of the road. And so my uncle like got out. I just felt like he had to solve the situation. And he went to go grab it and move it, and it like shot its neck around back to bite him. And so he just chucked it into like a ditch, basically. They snap.
My dad would always tell me this story. He knew someone, or his dad had a friend where like a snapping turtle bit them, and it wouldn't let go. They had to like cut its head off, and it still wouldn't let go. So yeah, I was always scared of getting bit by a snapping turtle. That was part of why I never went in the water. It was also Chicago River water was very putrid when I was growing up.
Yeah, no, that's very. You don't need to explain that. I got you. that's disgusting back then. Like as we've talked about, we have a friend who swims in it now, and we're just kind of like, good for you, buddy.
Yeah. Another animal we'd see in our backyard is beavers.
So you actually saw them?
No, I did actually at one point, but I never saw the one that was literally in our backyard, because around when I was born, there was a beaver in our backyard trying to topple our 100-year-old tree. And if it went the wrong way, it could have like destroyed our house. So my dad fenced it off. He was trying to get it so the beaver wouldn't chop it down. But I never literally saw the beaver that was literally in the backyard.
Oh, wow. I wonder how long that would take him to get through that.
I'm not sure, but you know what I learned this week? So they don't actually chop the trees all the way through typically. They Or they just chop them down enough so that then the wind can topple them over. That's safer for them and less work than if they try to chop it down themselves.
Right. I guess that makes intuitive sense. Yeah, I guess I'm picturing a very Looney Tunes-esque kind of beaver chopping a tree.
Yeah. But a beaver actually popped up in Chicago news this week. Did you see that article? A remarkably rotund beaver is making a splash on the south side.
Yeah, they had a lot of fun writing this article. They've had a lot of different ways to call this beaver fat. To describe her as looking like a beach ball in the water. And so they think that it's pregnant, but it's like been this big for a while. So it's kind of strange.
Yeah, it's in the Bubbly Creek branch of the Chicago River, which is close to Bridgeport. And it has that name.
No, it apparently comes from the like stockyards period. It was all the animal fat and stuff that would like bubble up to the surface.
Okay.
And I've read somewhere that like if it gets dredged, like that stuff will just re-release basically. And this was like the Chicago River was so putrid that like when there was the Great Chicago Fire, it was able to jump the river in 2 locations, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah, that is wild.
It's just, man, because the streets were on fire too, because they had a lot of like wood brick paved roads. And so if the streets in the river are on fire, like why did people rebuild? That would have just been like, all right, I'm going to Detroit. Like it would have just been like, all right, I'm going to go to a different city now.
Because the railroad lines converged here.
Of course.
So that's why they rebuilt. But yeah, this beaver, it doesn't have a name yet. They're trying to give it names like Lori have Beeffoot.
Yeah.
Too silly for me.
Yeah. No.
But she is an example of what's called like charismatic megafauna. So this is an idea in conservation that you need these like large mammals that people get really excited about in order to then get the funding and the protection for places where there are other species that aren't as like charismatic or interesting like insects.
Yeah. No, yeah, we've talked about Chance the Snapper. I'm trying to think of some other more famous ones. Fat Bear Week at that one national park. Yeah.
Well, there's Mudang. That's like international charismatic megafauna.
Sure, that's been great for hippos this year.
Pygmy hippos, yeah.
Just for pygmy hippos.
Yeah.
Oh,
I did think she was cute, but I didn't
so
like...
Wet. I don't like Mudang just looked too wet. I didn't really like it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just looks squeaky.
Yeah. A fact about beavers I learned this week. So their teeth are orange because they have iron in them.
I didn't know that. They do have disgusting teeth. Like I want to picture like bright white teeth. I don't know what exactly I'm picturing. Maybe Crafty Beaver. That's a home store here in Chicago that has like, it's like a cute homespun Home Depot basically.
When I think about beavers, I think about the 90s Nickelodeon show Angry Beavers.
Yeah, that was not a hit. I don't think that got enough for syndication. But yeah, I do remember that. It was like a yellow beaver and then a brown beaver.
Yeah, I used to watch that. But no, the shade of orange that beavers' teeth are is not as... I don't think it's that gross. I think it's kind of metal, that their teeth are metal.
Yeah, no, it's cool. No, I think they're such admirable creatures. In that article about the big rotund one, there's this quote from one of the people who work for the park district, and he said, sometimes they'll come out in the day, and if they're in a hurry and just trying to get tons of branches for some projects. Like it's a lot of human projection in that, like the beaver does not think that it has projects. It's like not like we're just applying our thoughts to it, but like it's just like me and Home Depot for real. Like that's so cute. We could see ourselves in them.
Yeah. I like learning about beavers this week. I realized that they could become like a fixation for me because I get really passionate about different things. Not as much now that I'm a podcaster because I just get really hyped about one thing each week. But previously, I would go through periods of like several months or a few years where I'd get really passionate about ancient Roman ruins or exotic fruit or public transit. And then I realized that beavers, I could get equally as excited and spend like half a year on them because...
There's a lot there.
My in for being excited about animals is actually if they start building things. Like in college, I did a project on insect architecture, quote unquote. It's an idea. But I talked about like, ants, bees, social caterpillars, antlions, other insects where they build things. And that's just my way of getting excited about them because it's so easy for me to get excited about building. But beavers, I never thought of them this way. But the thought of them just building a dam, that's like, okay. Yeah. That doesn't really do that much for me. But in reality, they build a dam, a lodge. The dam then creates a beaver pond. They also might have beaver canals. They sometimes build what's called a raft in the middle of a pond that's like a food supply for the winter. And it's like a network.
Yeah.
They're building a network because basically the reason for the dam is they feel more secure and they can move faster in water. And these shallow ponds that they create are increasing their sense of safety. And so just thinking about it as being this like complex system, it's like, wow, I could fixate on that for a long time.
No, they terraform their environment like so much more than other animals. And to me, it's just crazy because it feels like they have a job. Like every other animal, how I imagine they spend their day is just tracking down sustenance and shelter. Like those are just the two concerns. And then finding a mate. They just do those three things. And it feels like beavers do all of that. And they also have to like clock into their 9 to 5 as a general contractor. I love them.
Yeah. And they're very good for the environment. Like those dams and their ponds, they give rivers a chance to slow down. And then pollutants or sediments in the river, they can start to sink to the bottom. So they're kind of like a natural water filter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. This is all innate instinct. You know, I saw some cute animal video of like people who were rehoming a beaver that couldn't return to nature or something. And if you just play a water sound, they just like, he would just put pillows. He would drag pillows over and cover it up because he thinks that it's a hole in the dam.
But also, how many humans would get annoyed with the sound of running water 24/7?
Yeah, I'd want to throw a pillow on it too.
I don't want to reduce them down to just instinct because I think periodically we find that animals are smarter than we think.
Yeah, but it's, I don't know. I don't think the innateness takes away from it at all. Like they are like intelligent the way that they're able to like problem solve and find the right size stick for a hole and stuff. Like they have something approaching the very beginnings of tool usage, I would say. Someone's gonna yell at me for that. But I don't know. It is funny though, because like not to stunt on beavers or something, but it shows you how like language, like oral language and then written language are so much better at transmitting like cultural and technical skills. Because even the most basic of human dwellings are like orders of magnitude more complicated than a beaver dam. You know, like the complexity goes into like an igloo that can be nice and warm on the inside and structurally secure, and you can have a place for food, a place for sleeping, and you can like solve the problems of having dead air, or like yurts, which are more advanced even too. Like that stuff really interests me, and it's like, yeah, it'd be much harder to just pass that down through genes.
Yeah. But I mean, have you looked at the layout of a beaver lodge?
I have. I love the cross section of it. Like it's basically this like, it's not like a diving bell because it is like, it's not pressurized. It is above there, but it's like great protection from, it's temperature controlled to an extent. It's safe from predators. Well, not every predator, like some things can sneak up into there.
Yeah.
But no, it's like, it's ingenious. I'm just saying that we kind of have an edge. I know it's not fair to compare. We have hands, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm still impressed. I think they might be my favorite animal now.
Wow.
Because previously I would have said it was a mountain goat.
Really?
Which is a very LOL so random animal.
Yeah, there's something, an animal is more random when you add a little qualifier to it. Like goat, kind of random. Mountain goat, more random somehow. The specificity is somehow more random.
Yeah. I just like that mountain goats are able to climb at such steep angles. It's really amazing.
Yeah, it looks funny.
Yeah. The beaver is creating a whole system, and that's amazing too.
Yeah. I don't even know what my favorite animal is.
Yeah. Wait, what's your favorite animal again?
I'm trying to think. We're talking about white-tailed deer next, and I do kind of feel like a stag or an elk, completely different animal. But I do feel like I love those symbols a lot. So it might be those.
Yeah.
I don't know. When I was a kid, but then broadly, I like southwestern U.S. like desert wildlife more, because I think that like roadrunners, Gila monsters, that little fennec fox thing, like those I think are much cooler than like the white-tailed deer. Sorry.
I like desert owls too.
Yeah, no,
Those are cool.
Those are cool. I remember I went to a wild, like loosey-goosey Jewish kindergarten, and they brought in a hissing owl from the zoo. And we got to see it. And that was just like the whole day. I mean, nothing got done. We just saw a hissing owl and then talked about it for the rest of it.
Did it hiss at the children?
Yeah, yeah. It hisses when it's like, when it's happy, when it's sad, anything, it just hisses.
Yeah, very on brand.
Yeah.
So white-tailed deer. Okay, so these actually went extinct in Chicago. And these are the biggest like animals you can find in the city just in terms of their mass. Like they're really big animals.
Mm-hmm. No, they're like, it's kind of crazy because, I mean, I was talking about Bambi earlier, but it's the symbol of like untouched nature. But like white-tailed deer are so subject to human forces. Like we basically brought their population to its lowest in 1900. Just mass like hunters, basically killing them. And then things turn around, and then they return back to around their 1800s previous level. And then they're actually dipping down now, which I meant to read about, but I didn't. I wonder what's happening there, because I feel like there is like cervine diseases and stuff, and so I think it's some of those. But hunting is very like thoughtful and controlled in America. It's pretty like tightly understood.
I mean, so many of the animals we're talking about could have gone extinct if people didn't notice their numbers were dropping. Like the Eurasian beaver went down to just 1,200 members of that species, which is really low. But white-tailed deer, of the animals on this list, you'd be surprised to learn that they're maybe the most dangerous. They're responsible for 440 of the estimated 458 Americans killed in physical confrontations with wildlife each year, according to a Washington Post article.
Crazy. That only leaves 18 for bears and mountain lions.
18 for everything else.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
But yeah. And that's even, I guess we don't have as much moose and as much people in Alaska to get killed by moose.
I think, okay, this is really digging in my memory, but I think maybe only 3 people have gotten killed by moose in the past. Wow. Not that many.
Yeah, because the way I understand it is like with a deer, the unsafe thing is people swerve around it and hit a tree, where you should just hit the deer and go through it. With a moose, it's the opposite. You should try and veer around it, because the spinny little legs will like collapse on your hood and kill you. Yeah.
I had a coworker at the library, a security guard, who killed a deer with their car in Wisconsin.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I dodged one in California, I think, actually. So that must have been a mule deer, not a whitetail. But no, it's really scary. Like it really, like you really lock in after that. It was very focused.
Yeah. It's not just like car crashes, though. I mean, I've seen videos of deer, the bucks with horns, charging at people and hunters. Like that can mess you up.
Oh, definitely.
I bet at least someone's died from that.
Yeah. I feel like dying in a hunting accident is very Lindy, though. It's very king-like. It's taken a lot. Antonin Scalia, he died in a hunting trip. That wasn't a hunting accident. Dick Cheney shot that guy forever ago.
Yeah. But 458 Americans killed by wildlife really isn't that much, you know?
I wonder how many Americans die of heart attacks on hunting trips. I feel like that's the most American thing, is to like exercise so rarely that either shoveling your car out of the snow or going on the yearly hunting trip kills you. Like that's the most sedentary American way to die. Oh, I've seen a deer in Chicago before, in the city limits, kind of barely though. Hollywood Park is a very sleepy neighborhood on the northwest side, and I was getting out of my work truck back when I worked insurance restoration at like 7:30 a.m. And yeah, I just saw a doe and her fawn, and it was beautiful, and it just sticks in my mind to this day. Every time I've seen a deer, I've had like a semi-religious experience. It's beautiful.
Yeah. I feel the same way, because they're kind of human-sized. They don't make you feel like they're intelligent in any particular way, but they just feel like you feel their presence, you know?
Yeah, it feels like, I don't know, it's the lack of intelligence, or maybe part of the draw. Like they just seem like they're this conduit into like something more base. I don't know, they're beautiful.
Yeah. I would see them a lot in our backyard along the river, but they're also in a lot of the forest preserves in the city, like Labatt Woods and places like that. They're easy to spot.
Oh yeah. Next animal is coyotes.
Yeah. So these are awesome, and I think they're a good example of how nature is moving into cities during the Anthropocene, more so than the other animals on the list, because these were present in Chicago around 1900, but they were kind of new to the area. They only started to expand out of the Southwest about 300 years ago in the 1700s, I believe.
Yeah. And then they really started expanding in the 1920s, which I was surprised by. And apparently that was due to just like agriculture. Like that brings humans, which brings rats, which brings coyotes.
Yeah.
Essentially. And then also like, I guess deforestation helps. Like they do better, and like you can't really picture a coyote in a forest, you know?
Yeah. I mean, the Southwest, there aren't that many trees. I think they need dens, and they just need like mammals to eat. They primarily eat those.
I was actually talking to a friend from Las Vegas today. I asked him about coyotes and stuff, because I was like, in my memory in Las Vegas, I only saw a coyote once. And he was like, yeah, we had one on campus at UNLV, and it was a local news story. Despite them being from the Southwest, like there is something about like the suburban setup of Las Vegas with the like 8-lane roads and stuff that makes it pretty hard for coyotes to be alive for very long.
Have you seen a coyote in Chicago?
Yeah, I saw one in Old Town. So that would have been the intersection of like Wisconsin and Lincoln. There's this like pedestrian way, and I had a coyote sprint past me, and this guy walking past was just like, "Was that a wolf?" I'm like, no, man, come on. Like, people don't know how large wolves are. I realized, but no, it was really cool. I felt very like stunned by it.
I've seen them multiple times, but the most distinct memory I have is underneath the Green Line tracks around 26th Street. I saw this coyote running underneath the rail line, and I pulled out my phone to try to take a video, and I ended up capturing one, but it's so shaky and everything is so dark. It made me realize why videos of cryptids are always so like bad looking. It's hard when you see, a fascinating creature and have to pull out your camera spur of the moment.
Yeah, I tried to do it and it was just a blob. It's like it can't be done. So yeah, maybe Sasquatch is real. Yeah, and the photos are just bad.
It could be.
Cryptids episode?
That's on our list actually. I've been thinking about it. Maybe around like Halloween or something.
Yeah, Mothman.
Yeah. But Chicago's coyote population, our urban coyote population, is one of the biggest in the country. There's around 2,000 of them here, and they've been studied quite a lot by a local professor named Stanley D. Gary. A book recently came out that's been popular at the Chicago Public Library, Coyotes Among Us, and I read part of it for this week, but it's more of a coffee table book. It does have a lot of good facts, but it's more for the pictures. There's really cool pictures of coyotes all throughout Chicago in the book.
Yeah. So there was like before the kind of the coyote craze we're having now, because there was a video recently of a coyote being pulled out of a refrigerator in an Aldi. Was that by Humboldt Park?
Yeah, that was by Humboldt Park.
Mm-hmm. But before that, back in 2007, there was a coyote that hung out in a Quiznos. We talked about this on the podcast somehow. I'm just fixated on this.
It was during the fast food culture episode.
Yeah. Quiznos fascinates me. and so does this coyote. And they have such a good photo of it. It's just so clear. And he just has these crazy eyes. And you can also see the sobe drinks in the background, which really dates the photo to 2007.
Yeah.
In a Quiznos.
Coyotes are not as attractive looking as wolves. Like there's something about the spacing of their eyes and how skinny they look sometimes.
Yeah.
Like they look like if you saw them dead by the side of the road and they got up, you'd be like, I thought that was dead.
Yeah, they're scrappy. They're definitely yeah. They're not really a danger to humans.
Oh, not at all.
There's only one recorded case of a death being by coyotes, and it was this like starving, lost folk singer girl who was like lost in the desert, and then a pack of coyotes essentially like exhausted her.
But there's actually theories that those were coy wolves, so coyote wolf hybrids.
Oh yeah, then there's plenty of deaths by wolves. Oh yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, when coyotes started to come back to Chicago in the 90s, the city was a bit concerned, like, oh, are they going to be dangerous? Like, what are they doing here? They would catch the coyotes and then release them farther out in the exurbs and try to, get them out of the city limits. But then they'd always come back. They'd put radio transmitters on them and they'd find that they'd go back. They'd go back or they'd die trying to go to the place where they originally caught.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to see them kind of like change their tack on that.
Yeah, they're still definitely deadly for pets. Mm-hmm. I think of the animals on the list, this one feels the most like a nuisance, but there's still a discourse around all of these about like, at what point could they be considered a pest or vermin? And, what's good for ecology, what's good for nature isn't always going to like line up with our needs as a species. Mm-hmm. But coyotes are pretty prolific. Something I learned is when it's mating season for them, they'll howl. And depending on how many howls they get back, they can regulate their hormones to determine how many offspring they're going to have. So if they hear a lot of howls, they won't have as many cubs.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So interesting.
So they can bounce back their population quickly.
I would hear coyotes out at summer camp. One of them howled, and this one counselor was like, that means the coyotes got to kill. I'm like, I don't think that's true. I also like the pronunciation of coyote.
I've never liked it. I prefer coyote.
Yeah. Yeah. And so all this talk about invasive species and the kind of like returning of animals to cities remind me of the nature is healing meme during the pandemic. You remember this?
Yeah, I did. I had a lot of other things to worry about during the pandemic, though.
I wasn't worried about this. It's just something that passed by. I think it's interesting, and I'm not the only one apparently, because people did like an actual academic study on this meme and just kind of the underlying sentiments behind it and what it shows about changing sentiments and how we think about nature. Because really this is like kind of a twofold thing. The first part is this like journalism stories and the like videos about like, wow, all those animals that are afraid of humans in their cars are now like creeping back into cities. Like, oh, in the Italian countryside, horses are wandering in or something. And then some people I think took that very sincerely, and they would do those takes like, I think we are the virus. Humans are the virus. Like, I don't know. I think like midwit people I follow on Instagram would post. That's mean. I can't be using internet lingo like that. But then the next layer was like people posting memes satirizing this with like, a whole bunch of Croc shoes in a river, and like the Crocs have returned to the river. Like, nature is healing. And I think it shows that we're starting to break free of the Fern Gully kind of like self-flagellating view of humans and nature. And that we're kind of understanding that like, no, there is like a little more nuance to this. Like, if we do take that to be true, what's the end game here? Just complete like human extinction? Because that's where that kind of thinking came from, the kind of like anti-natalist things, like we are a scourge on the planet and need to erase ourselves. Like, that's not fun for anyone. I think you and I both advocate, we talked about in the nuclear episode, like a kind of abundance. We can't get people to be involved in like any kind of social thing if you're promising them like, all right, we'll do all this work and then life will be a little worse. Like you have to promise people abundance.
Yeah. I mean, I do think we're having an undue impact on nature that's undisputable, but I think nature is adjusting and getting used to it. Like there's this really interesting fact I mentioned on the insect aesthetics episode, which is that the biomass of all ants is equal to that of humans. So if you total up the weight of all ants, it's just as much weight as human beings. And I feel like the insect world, a lot of species outside of the Hymenoptera order, they've had to adapt to try to exist or coexist with ants, which are just so dominant. And I feel like mammals have had to do the same thing with us. It's taken a while, but they've had to learn. And now they've found their way into cities, and they're doing better in cities than they are in, say, like suburbs or the countryside. In the case with coyotes and some of the other species we've talked about.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Yeah. It's, we were talking about beavers earlier, and they're held up for their industriousness, and ants have a similar like role. Ants and bees as well have been like, we talked about this in insect aesthetics, that like it's one of the few things to get one of the few insects to be recorded like in writings at the time, because we see like human traits in them. So it's kind of fair. Like it feels like we have this moral responsibility as the largest biomass in the room to deal with this stuff. Technically our livestock is larger biomass than we are, like all of our cows and chickens and that stuff, but still.
Yeah, because you're referring to the statistic that 96% of the biomass of all mammals is humans and their livestock. Only 4% is wildlife, which isn't very much.
No.
And then something we've sort of like gestured at throughout the episode is how important the Chicago River has been to local wildlife, because urban rivers, they oftentimes kind of operate as quote unquote highways for nature. They allow nature to traverse the city in a way that's much easier than if they were trying to cross roads. I don't like the car analogy, but it's kind of true.
Yeah, if you just said it was a road, that wouldn't really get the point across. Like the idea is it is something that skips over other things. Like it's the best term I think we have.
Yeah. But the banks of the Chicago River, they've changed quite a lot since I was first born. And I would argue that they've become less wild due to a lot of efforts that seem good on paper, because parks like River Park, Jacob Park, and then also Horner Park, they used to have the areas near the river just be fenced off. There'd just be big trees there. They'd let nature do its thing. And now they've done all these like landscaping or rewilding projects, quote unquote. But it's exactly the sort of thing Fred Pearce would have critiqued in the New Wild, because their idea of like what's wild is actually not wild at all. They're creating these like very antiquated ecosystems that are closed off. And they're like, okay, everything that was here 200 years ago, it's good. Everything that isn't is bad. And they're putting all these resources and effort into just having like native wildflowers and things like that. That probably would be better used for other things.
Like placed in other areas? Or like the space?
No, just the money.
Oh.
I just think...
Or the level of effort to like actively rewild a place as opposed to kind of passively rewilding.
Well, the thing is, it's not wild. It's just... We've turned those into places that are a bit more enjoyable for us. Like have you ever been to River Park?
I think so.
I would not be surprised if you haven't.
But no, I've biked through it. They have mountain bike jump trails there.
Yeah, there's a bike path along the river. But that whole area, again, it was just fenced off. now it's like you can go to the water's edge.
Yeah,
You
yeah. Oh, I've
didn't
done
used
that,
to be
yeah.
allowed to do that, actually,
Mhm.
which is good for humans. But again, it's just like, I don't know if this is like allowing it to just serve as like a nature highway like rivers are supposed to in urban settings.
Well, I think the fences would have impeded a lot of megafauna if they still had those up. A beaver wouldn't be able to go up and rest somewhere.
No,
And then,
I would see like deer and beavers. I mean, it wouldn't be
yeah.
like at the water's edge. There'd be
Hmm.
like a bit of space in between where there'd be trees.
Hmm. And then for migratory birds, like I see the appeal of like the Bill Jarvis Migratory Bird Sanctuary and all that. Like it's giving a stopover point. If these animals didn't have that, like they'd have to go further or somewhere else. Like I think that this I don't think these people are as caged in as you might think they are. I think this is also a development from how parks used to be. Like if those places were built, like if you look at Horner Park, I
Yeah.
feel bad for international listeners now. We're just like citing off like Chicago parks and stuff, but this is all coming together. Don't you guys worry. But that place was a quarry, and then it was like a pure recreation park where just everything was like swing sets. It was like kind of more carnival-esque than anything, and not really a lot of like nature in any sense. And so now it's nature in an artificially constructed sense. It's still more nature than there was. It's better than just a lawn they trim every year. It's going to have more diversity than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like chapter 11 of the New Wild, what would have happened if we let that bad land just get rewilded by nature? Like who knows what interesting species would have popped up. But no, I mean, people like parks. It's better
Yeah.
that people are enjoying things.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, now we can get into the kind of like other part about wildlife and the city, which is like park systems of like trying to have it all, of trying to have a city with like, yeah, adequate nature and what nature looks like.
And I think we can start out this section by talking about a recent Upzoned episode about like urban forests, because that can be like an introduction into the debate around urban forests. Because on that episode, Chuck was really angry about the idea that you can have urban forests because he thinks those two things you can have both at the same time.
I kind of want to know what he's described. Like, what's a great example of an urban forest like this? Is it like the Cook County Forest Preserves, basically? Like, or smaller than that? Just chunks of trees in the middle of a city?
It might be smaller. I imagine it being a bit on a smaller scale. I mean, it's true though that like urban forests do have benefits, like they help with stormwater runoff. There are some animals that live there. But his argument is that if we're going to solve the housing crisis, we need to develop that land. But also it's like, it can't support that many animals. Like you need an actual forest if you're going to have things like bears and deer.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that like urbanist meme about an island and you can develop it with a building that has 100 units or 100 single family homes?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's just showing like, yeah, more of this can be nature. I mean, I always like the best thing you can do for nature is live in a city, much lower like footprint.
Yeah. It's a very effective meme that pisses off conservatives.
Yeah, it's true.
Because it's true though that like the more people we can shove within the city limits of Chicago, the less land is going to get developed that has never been developed before. And we should be like focusing on that infill, because people who live in the suburbs, they have this perception that their pattern of development is better for nature because they live amongst nature. They have access to more wildlife than we do here. But in reality, it's not better for wildlife. They'd be better if they had a smaller footprint and there was more actual wild forest out there.
Yes, I agree with that, but I do feel like we have a like an image problem with that, because I think that's when people start getting worried about like they want you to live in the pod away from nature so that they can keep all the nature for themselves or something.
Yeah. The inverse of the like that island meme is actually conservatives will share this photograph of New York City and Manhattan. And it's like clearly in the dead of winter, probably February or January. And the city just looks so gray. You can't see any green. And they're like, this is so bad for the environment.
And to be clear, like the YIMBY/Strong Towns people are not anti-tree. Like they just think that like, you just have trees and planters. It's kind of a functionalist view of trees. It's like they're good for shading for people and like reducing the heat island effect. And they should be used in these kind of surgical ways. And you shouldn't just chuck them out. If it's a mature tree, you should invest in like a tree scooper, basically. It's the machine is called a tree spade, which is so much the name is so much smaller than what you think it would actually be. Like it's not a shovel, it's a whole powered like truck. Yeah, like trees have their purpose, but it's like it's either use them in the sparing way, like minimum effective tree, I think is what they're trying to kind of espousing, is that like, look at New York, plenty of trees there, not just in like, Central Park, but throughout the city. It's just what would be gained by not having houses between them,
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, they say it's okay to have parks. They're a necessary urban amenity that improves quality of life. But their critique is just of the idea that a place within the city limits should be set aside as a preserve. They think that that's not a good idea and kind of a waste of resources. And where they actually do that, though, that it's actually a big problem, is greenbelts in the United Kingdom.
Yeah. It's a lot of great stuff came out of the kind of city beautiful movement of the 1800s. And this was one of the more well-meaning and ill-executed ones.
Yeah.
The idea of using a ring of green space around a city. It's like, oh, and then everyone can just go out and access it. And it's like, all right, what if the city gets too big and we need to put city there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people outside of the UK, these green spaces, you can't build anything in them. It's basically to stop urban sprawl. And because of that, it has made the cost of housing and development higher in the UK. It has made density better. Mm-hmm. I can see an argument for or against them. But overall, I think if you're going to build, it's better to do it, in a place that's in proximity to all of these other urban amenities as opposed to on the other side of the green belt.
Sometimes when a park is so good, it does kind of generate some density around it. You see this only really in like Lincoln Park in Chicago. We're right up. The park also like connects to the lake, so that like doubles the appeal of it. Yeah. And so you get this kind of like sudden rise in high rises along that street. But that's not really true of other inland parks in Chicago. You get like stately greystones across from Humboldt Park. You get nicer things next to parks, definitely, but it doesn't, not always density. Sometimes it is just more single family homes actually.
Central Park was a massive success, and other parks throughout the nation were planned in a similar way. But unlike that one, again, as you're saying, the density never popped up around the park, like particularly Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. It gets critiqued by YIMBYs a lot because it was planned to be like that, but all the buildings that line the park are still like 2 or 3 stories.
Mm-hmm. When I lived close to like actual Lincoln Park, I was kind of like, I would kind of like if those were just more like businesses I could go to, which is, no, I do like having nature. I just thought that in the winter, I think.
Yeah. And this debate too, you can find it in Canada as well, because Toronto has a green belt. Do you know Doug Ford and his brother?
Yeah, the late what was his brother's name?
Rob Ford.
Yeah, the famous crack smoking mayor of Toronto. Yes.
Yeah. So Toronto, they've actually cut down some of their greenbelt so that there has been some development. And his brother, Doug, he's running to try to get like more of that land to be developed. But yeah, it really doesn't help when we're having a housing crisis to have all of these modestly sized spaces set aside for nature that would be better utilized for dwelling.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, I hate to be so like raw and efficient about this, but it is like parks past a certain size, like it's like, what are we doing here? Like you kind of get the point. Like I love a good grand park. So a different approach than the green belt, developed much later, so post-war, is the Copenhagen Fingers Plan. So this was kind of this was a transit plan first and a nature plan second. The idea is that there's outstretching like the fingers of a hand transit lines, and you develop like density along them, businesses and residential, so people can get downtown easily and get home and have everything they need. And then the idea is you infill those empty spaces around the fingers with nature. And so it's not interfering with the kind of, flow of people, but everyone gets that kind of access. And it's not like super hard lines of nature. Like there is still ways to cross through there. And that's been a pretty good success for them. And then in terms of what Chicago's like, it's kind of a mixed bag of those, because it was not as centrally planned as any of this. Like Chicago itself actually has an emerald necklace. People use that phrase. We have these kind of like big ticket parks, like extra large parks that were built in late 1800s, early 1900s, and they're connected with tree-lined boulevards. And so it's not really a green belt because it's pretty porous. And honestly, these tree-lined boulevards just uses like major throughways sometimes and carry a lot of traffic load. So that's not very park-like, I don't think.
Yeah, these aren't a green belt. These are managed by the Chicago Park District, but they were created once the city started having concerns about overcrowding, and they wanted amenities for people to enjoy.
Yeah. And then another layer on top of that is so these are kind of in a midpoint around the city.
Yeah.
Like if Chicago was a fan, these are in the middle of the fan. Chicago is pretty fan shaped.
It's semicircular.
Mm-hmm. And then so at the edge of that, you have the Cook County Forest Preserves. And so that's developed by a different body. And it actually has influence from Frederick Law Olmsted. He's the guy who did Central Park, advocating for this romantic style of nature parks. And then so that's another like wrinkle on this. And this isn't built in any master plan. This is whatever land they could get, basically.
Yeah. And
so that some of it is kind of finger shaped because it runs around along the river, which kind of radially goes to the city. There's also ones that kind of run greenbelt direction wise and hem in development on either side. And there's just big blobs of parks too.
Yeah. Yeah. The Cook County Forest Preserves feel like our closest equivalent to a greenbelt, but we don't have anything that's mandated by the state or the government for that. The closest ordinance to a greenbelt in the U.S. that I'm aware of is Portland. They have like a commission that decides when and if the borders of the metro area are allowed to expand. They're pretty strict about it.
Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, the Cook County Forest Preserves, have you ever been to like Labatt Woods and those places?
Yeah, I've passed through. I've biked around them.
Yeah, I once volunteered with this group called the Friends of the Cook County Forest Preserve, and I went out and I chopped up some trees from this invasive species, and then we burned them in a big bonfire. And I just had so many like reservations and questions like, is it really better for us to be releasing this carbon? Like, is this invasive species that much of a problem?
Yeah, it feels like we're just like excising something. Yeah. Like we're doing this for ourselves. Like,
yeah. I mean, people can have different ideas on nature.
You guys couldn't mulch it?
What?
You guys couldn't mulch it? That's
a
shame.
We could have done other things with it. But the idea is just like, we could have done anything as a group to help the forest preserve thrive. And the thing that we were tasked with was removing an invasive species. And then we released more carbon. We made global warming worse. So
that is pretty grim.
It's just like, I think our collective approach to nature is ideological, like a lot of things. People are just doing what they think might be the right thing. But there have been so many approaches to nature, and hopefully our listeners after this week are a bit more open to the idea of the Anthropocene and just letting nature do its thing, including in cities.
Yeah. It's so funny because even that phrase, letting nature do its thing, like we've changed what that means over time as well, from this like strict Puritan preservationist thing to more of a like, hemming it in less. But yeah.
Yeah. And then if people have more interest in this topic, there's the Nature of Cities blog. It was recommended for Fred Pearce's book. And then there's also, I found like an urban wildlife subreddit. It's not super big, but there are people posting about this sort of thing. If you do take pictures of wildlife in your neighborhoods, I'm sure you could upload them there.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you everyone. I hope you have a good week.
See ya.
Bye.